I... The air in the Utah desert was a thick, oppressive blanket, heavy with the scent of sun-baked earth and distant sagebrush. It clung to the skin, seeped into the clothes, and seemed to press down on the very act of breathing, making each inhale a conscious effort against the relentless heat. Above, the sky stretched an impossibly wide canvas of faded cerulean, a stark, unblemished dome that offered no quarter from the merciless afternoon sun, which beat down with an almost physical intensity. It was a silence so profound it seemed to vibrate, a primal hush that swallowed every tiny sound. The scuttle of a lizard across ancient sandstone, the faint whisper of wind through skeletal creosote bushes, even the rhythmic thud of Ethan Vance's worn hiking boots against the dusty, gravelly ground. He moved with a practiced, almost meditative cadence, his gaze sweeping across the desolate expanse, a landscape carved by eons of wind and water, revealing layers of time and forgotten stories beneath its arid surface. Each ripple in the rock, each shadow cast by a jagged peak, felt like a silent testament to something vast and unknowable, a monumental secret held captive by the immense stretches of geological time. The colors of the desert, 1,000 shades of ochre, rust, and burnt sienna, seemed to deepen under the oppressive light, imbued with a strange, almost spectral beauty. Ethan wasn't a casual hiker seeking a scenic overlook to capture the perfect Instagram shot. His battered khaki shirt, perpetually stained with desert dust and sweat, and the deep lines etched around his keen, analytical eyes, spoke of a life spent in pursuit of the unseen, the unheard, the deliberately obscured. He was an anomaly in the academic world, a brilliant but stubbornly unconventional historian whose theories often danced on the fringes of acceptable discourse, dismissed by the mainstream as fantastical, romantic, or simply unprovable. Today, his destination was a remote archaeological site, little more than a whisper in obscure journals, dismissed by the mainstream as an anomalous collection of Puebloan petroglyphs and peculiar geological formations. It was a place where modern man rarely tread, a forgotten corner of the map, precisely what drew Ethan like a moth to a flame. But Ethan knew better. He had seen the grainy satellite imagery, cross-referenced forgotten surveyor maps from the early 20th century, and felt an insistent, almost spiritual pull to this exact spot for months, a feeling that transcended mere academic curiosity. A strange current seemed to run through the very bedrock here. Locals from the nearest tiny, isolated towns spoke of whispering winds that carried voices from nowhere, of inexplicable lights dancing on the horizon when no human settlement was near, and of an unsettling feeling of being watched by unseen eyes, especially around the time of the summer solstice. These weren't the usual folksy desert tales. They were laced with an older, deeper apprehension, a sense of ancient intrusion that predated modern man's arrival in the valleys below. Ethan had always been drawn to such liminal spaces, places where the veil between the known and the unknown felt thinnest, where the conventional rules of reality seemed to fray at the edges. He believed firmly that true history wasn't found in polished textbooks, meticulously edited and approved, but in the cracks, the forgotten corners, the anomalies that scholars so readily dismissed as inconvenient data points. And this place, this sun-scorched patch of forgotten wilderness, hummed with anomaly, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor beneath his feet. The silence grew heavier as he approached the designated coordinates, a palpable weight that pressed against his eardrums, almost deafening him to his own thoughts. The air, already hot, seemed to shimmer with an unusual intensity, distorting the distant mesas into wavering specters, their jagged outlines blurring against the sky. There was no wind now, not even a breath of it, yet the fine dust on the ground seemed to swirl in unseen eddies, as if stirred by an invisible presence, a breath from an ancient slumbering titan. Ethan paused, adjusting the brim of his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes narrowed against the glare, trying to discern the source of the unsettling sensation. A flicker at the edge of his peripheral vision made him turn sharply, but there was nothing. Just the same endless expanse of rock and scrub stretching to an indifferent horizon. Yet the sensation lingered, a cold prickle at the base of his neck, the distinct, undeniable feeling of being observed. It wasn't menacing, not exactly, but profoundly unsettling. It was the feeling one gets when staring into the void and realizing the void might just be staring back with an ancient, patient gaze. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the desert's vastness wash over him, trying to ground himself in the tangible reality of the baking earth and arid air. When he opened them again, the world seemed to shift, just for a fraction of a second. The vibrant blue of the sky seemed to darken to an impossible bruised violet, and an immense dark shape, like a colossal disk, momentarily blotted out the sun, casting an impossibly deep, cold shadow across the landscape. It wasn't a cloud, wasn't an optical illusion, wasn't a trick of exhausted eyes. It was sharp, distinct, utterly alien in its geometric perfection. It hung there, silent and terrifying, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a heartbeat. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone, swallowed by the relentless blue. The sky was clear, unblemished, as if the vision had been nothing more than a trick of light and an overactive imagination fueled by the desert's isolation. But a faint smell, like ozone after a lightning strike, lingered in the air, a chemical signature of the impossible. But Ethan felt it in his bones. It wasn't a trick. It was a memory, or perhaps a presage, a direct communication from a part of his mind he hadn't fully accessed. A shiver, not of cold, but of profound primal recognition ran down his spine, settling deep in his core, leaving him breathless. He'd seen something like that before, in a nightmare from his childhood, a nightmare he'd long suppressed, buried under layers of academic skepticism and rational thought. A looming shadow, vast and silent, blotting out the stars, accompanied by a cacophony of whispers that weren't words, but resonant frequencies, vibrating through his very being, shaking him to the core. The memory now resurfaced with an alarming clarity, bringing with it a strange primal fear, but also an undeniable sense of purpose. This wasn't just a dig anymore. This was a destination, a door, and he felt with an unshakable certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence was not empty, it was pregnant with untold secrets waiting to burst forth. He took a deep breath, the arid air burning his lungs, the taste of dust coating his tongue, and pushed onward, each step carrying him closer to whatever ancient truth lay hidden beneath the dust. He knew, with an instinct that transcended logic, that he was walking into something far grander and more terrifying than he could possibly imagine. This strange feeling, this premonition, was the first seed. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, anticipating the unfolding of a story that had been dormant for millennia, now poised to reawaken. If this beginning has already made you rethink what you knew, imagine what's coming next. So go ahead and leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because here every video reveals something few dare to show. He finally reached the precise coordinates, marked only by a small, unassuming pile of weathered rocks that he himself had meticulously placed during a preliminary scout trip months ago, a subtle beacon in the vast, indifferent landscape. The dig site was less a conventional archaeological excavation and more an anomaly, a crescent-shaped depression in the sandstone, barely discernible to the untrained eye, but clearly distinct from the natural erosion patterns around it, hinting at an artificial origin. Surrounding this depression were dozens of petroglyphs, ancient carvings etched into the dark, glossy varnish of the desert rock, their surfaces smoothed by centuries of wind and sand. They depicted familiar motifs: bighorn sheep, human-like figures with elongated limbs, intricate geometric patterns, and celestial bodies like suns and moons. Most were recognizable, characteristic of the Fremont or ancestral Puebloan cultures, consistent with established archaeological records, but a very select few, were disturbingly different, jarringly out of place. Ethan knelt, running a gloved hand over one such carving, his fingers tracing the ancient lines. It was a large, almost circular symbol, segmented like an eye, with intricate lines radiating outwards as if from a central pupil. Not quite a sun, not quite a star, and definitely not a known animal or human form. It was alien, both in design and in its placement amongst the more traditional motifs. It was as if two distinct hands from two vastly different worlds had collaborated on the same canvas across unimaginable spans of time, leaving behind a message only partially understood. This anomalous symbol was one of the first things that had truly captured his attention, drawing him away from the mundane pursuit of grant money and peer-reviewed articles, pulling him deeper into the labyrinth of the unknown. This wasn't a casual deviation from cultural norms. It was a deliberate, impossible fusion, a linguistic and artistic collision of worlds. The air around him suddenly grew cooler, a localized chill that cut through the oppressive desert heat like a knife, sending a shiver through his frame despite the high ambient temperature. He looked up, scanning the cloudless sky, searching for an explanation. A sudden shift in wind, a hidden pocket of shade. There was none. The sun still beat down mercilessly, yet this small pocket of air, directly above the crescent depression, was undeniably cold. It was unnatural, a physical manifestation of the strangeness that permeated this place, a localized atmospheric distortion that defied meteorological explanation. He shivered again, pulling his worn denim jacket tighter around his shoulders despite the absurdity of the gesture. His academic mind scrambled for rational explanations. A subterranean air current, a geological anomaly, a trick of light and shadow, a specific mineral composition cooling the air. But his gut, the instinct he had learned to trust above all else, whispered something far more profound. This is deliberate. This is technology, not nature. His gaze fell back to the crescent-shaped depression. It wasn't just a geological feature, a mere hollow in the rock. He noticed for the first time with this particular clarity a faint, almost imperceptible, metallic sheen under the thin layer of dust and pebbles that covered its surface. It pulsed, barely visible, as if catching the light from an angle that defied the natural reflectivity of stone. It gleamed with an inner light, a subtle luminescence that was not a reflection, but an emanation. He began to clear away the loose debris, his archaeological tools, a small trowel with a meticulously sharpened edge, a soft camel hair brush, working with a meticulous precision born of years of excavation and an almost reverential respect for the ancient. Each sweep of the brush felt like uncovering a secret layer of time, revealing a truth buried not just by sand, but by millennia of forgetfulness, of deliberate concealment. The dirt beneath was oddly dry, almost powdery, despite the recent sporadic desert rains, as if this particular patch of ground actively repelled moisture, preserving whatever lay beneath in a state of eternal aridness. As more of the metallic surface was exposed, a faint, rhythmic humming sound became audible. It was low, almost subsonic, vibrating through the ground and up into his bones, a deep resonance that settled in his chest. It wasn't the hum of machinery, nor the buzz of insects, nor the distant drone of an aircraft. It was organic, yet technological, a paradox of sound that defied categorization. It seemed to emanate from beneath the metallic surface, deep within the earth itself, a resonant frequency that felt ancient, yet impossibly advanced. The frequency shifted subtly, a silent song that resonated with the strange glyph he had seen in his fleeting vision earlier, an almost telepathic chord striking deep within his consciousness. His heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. mirroring the pulse he felt through the ground, a growing sense of awe and dread washing over him. This was it. This was the anomaly he had chased for so long. He carefully brushed away the last of the surface dust, revealing a perfectly smooth, dark grey metallic plate. It wasn't iron or steel or any alloy he knew. It was seamless, without rivet or joint, impossibly flush with the surrounding rock, as if it had grown from the earth itself. The surface absorbed light in some places and reflected it in others, creating a disorienting, almost fluid appearance. And etched into its center, glowing with an internal faint blue light, was the exact same segmented eye symbol he had seen in the petroglyphs and in his vision. The symbols on the plate, however, were more intricate, almost three-dimensional in their depth, coiling and interlocking with an elegant complexity that spoke of an unimaginable artistry and engineering, a language beyond human comprehension. The coldness he had felt earlier intensified, radiating from the plate in palpable waves. It was a profound, chilling cold that felt ancient, alien, extraterrestrial, a coldness that seemed to bypass his skin and settle directly into his bones, a feeling of vast cosmic distance. He reached out a gloved finger, hesitating for a fraction of a second, his mind racing with a mix of scientific caution and unbridled curiosity, then touched the symbol. The moment his finger made contact, a jolt, not of electricity but of pure, concentrated energy, shot up his arm, momentarily paralyzing him. It wasn't painful, but it was startling, a sudden rush that felt like a key turning in an ancient lock within his own mind, unlocking forgotten chambers of perception. Images flooded his consciousness, not memories, but impressions, fleeting glimpses of colossal geometric structures, vast cities sculpted from impossible materials, patterns that shifted and reformed with fluid grace, and a sense of immense speed, as if hurtling through the void between stars. A whisper, not in words but in pure thought, resonated in his skull, echoing the primal command he'd felt before. "Open!" Ethan recoiled, stumbling back, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his chest, a primal alarm blaring through his system. His breath hitched in his throat, and he found himself gasping for air in the already thin desert atmosphere, his lungs burning. The plate pulsed with a slightly brighter blue light, the humming sound intensifying, a silent siren call. The visions, though momentary, had left an indelible mark, a feeling of vastness and incomprehensibility, a chilling glimpse into a reality far beyond his wildest dreams. He looked around wildly, a fresh wave of paranoia washing over him. Had anyone seen that? Had he triggered something irreversible? The desert, once a silent observer, now felt like a hungry beast, awakened, its ancient eyes fixed upon him. This was more than he had dared to hope for, and infinitely more terrifying. This small metallic object, cold to the touch, with symbols unlike any known terrestrial culture, had just fundamentally shifted his perception of reality, tearing through the thin veil of normalcy. It wasn't a mere artifact. It was alive, in some strange, dormant way, and his touch had stirred it, awakening something that had slumbered for millennia. He looked at the plate, then at his trembling hand, a dizzying sense of awe and dread washing over him. The ground beneath him no longer felt like solid earth. It felt like the lid of a forgotten tomb, and he had just found the key, turning it on the verge of an unimaginable awakening. If you've made it this far without hitting pause, it's because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content, hit like now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. Ethan Vance, a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to chasing shadows of forgotten civilizations, now found himself standing at the precipice of one, a vast chasm opening beneath his feet, His official title, Senior Research Fellow in Historical Anomalies at a small independently funded institute in Boulder, Colorado, was often met with polite smiles and knowing glances from his more traditional peers, a thinly veiled dismissal of his unconventional pursuits. He wasn't a tenured professor with a pristine office overlooking a manicured quad. His workspace was a chaotic jumble of maps, ancient texts, digital tablets, rock samples, and the lingering scent of old paper and lukewarm, forgotten coffee. He wore his academic outsider status like a badge of honor, a testament to his unwillingness to conform to conventional narratives, to accept the easy answers provided by the establishment. He was a man driven by a profound dissatisfaction with the official story of humanity. From the moment he first saw the impossible precision of ancient megalithic structures in high school history books, structures that supposedly predated the tools and engineering knowledge to build them, a seed of doubt had been planted. That doubt had blossomed into an unshakable conviction that vast swathes of human history had been either deliberately erased or simply forgotten, deemed too inconvenient, too unsettling to fit into the tidy, linear timelines taught in schools. What he sought was not fame or recognition, or even the validation of his peers, but truth, raw and unvarnished, no matter how uncomfortable or disruptive it might be. He yearned to fill the gaping voids in our collective memory, to understand the true genesis of civilization, and perhaps of humanity itself, a quest that consumed his every waking moment. His greatest fear wasn't professional failure or ridicule. It was oblivion. The idea that profound knowledge, world-altering truths could simply vanish, swallowed by the sands of time or suppressed by powerful unseen forces, gnawed at him constantly. He carried the weight of this potential loss, a silent burden that fueled his relentless research, pushing him ever onward into the obscure corners of history. He often wondered late at night, poring over ancient Sumerian tablets or obscure Egyptian papyri under the dim glow of his desk lamp, if humanity was truly meant to remember, or if some higher power had deemed us unworthy, or perhaps simply unprepared for the full scope of our own story. His routine was a solitary dance with the past, a methodical descent into the rabbit hole of forgotten knowledge. Mornings began before dawn, fueled by strong, black coffee that tasted of bitter resolution, as he delved into digital archives, cross-referencing astronomical charts with ancient flood myths, searching for patterns, for anomalies, for anything that didn't quite fit. Afternoons were spent in the field, often in remote, overlooked corners of the American Southwest, or poring over dusty government geological surveys in forgotten archives, searching for geological oddities that might conceal something more, something artificial. Evenings were for writing, for meticulously crafting his theories, attempting to bridge the chasm between fringe speculation and verifiable data, knowing full well that most of his colleagues would dismiss his work with a patronizing sigh and a roll of their eyes. He often tried to forget the dismissive glares of professors at his graduate thesis defense, the thinly veiled contempt in their voices as they questioned his extracurricular interests, suggesting he seek a more grounded path. He tried to forget the sting of academic rejection letters, the lost grants that would have fueled his research, the whispered accusations of pseudoscience that clung to his name like an unpleasant odor. Most of all, he tried to forget the quiet disappointment of his old mentor, Dr. Aris Thorne. Thorne, once a brilliant and daring archaeologist, had been the one who first ignited Ethan's passion for the unconventional, who'd subtly encouraged his radical hypotheses, who had seen the spark of genuine curiosity beneath the surface. But something had changed in Thorne years ago. He had retreated from the edge, recanted some of his bolder claims, and settled into a safe, tenured position, dismissing Ethan's continued pursuit of ancient alien theories as an unfortunate divergence into fantasy, a waste of a brilliant mind. The memory of Thorne's distant, almost fearful eyes, whenever Ethan brought up his latest anomalous data, was a constant ache, a wound that never fully healed. Standing before the pulsing metallic plate, the humming growing subtly louder and more insistent, Ethan felt a tremor of that old, buried memory. Thorne's dismissive gaze, the weary shake of his head, the way he would change the subject abruptly, it all coalesced into a sharper, more painful image, suddenly imbued with new meaning. But now, it was different. Now, Ethan had physical proof, tangible, undeniable. This artifact, glowing faintly under the desert sun, humming with an ancient power that resonated through the earth, was the evidence he had always sought. It was the answer, or at least the beginning of one, solidifying everything he had ever suspected. Yet a part of him, a small, fearful part, wondered if Thorne had retreated not out of mere cowardice or academic pressure, but out of a deeper understanding of the immense, terrifying forces that Ethan was now unknowingly awakening. What if Thorne had seen something similar, something that had broken his spirit, or worse, threatened his very existence, forcing him into silence? He looked down at the segmented eye symbol, its blue light reflecting in his own eyes, transforming their analytical gleam into a confused mix of fear and wonder. The coldness emanating from it seemed to seep into his very soul, a chilling embrace that felt both alien and strangely familiar, as if it had been waiting for him. He had seen that symbol before, in his recurring childhood nightmare, glowing on the side of that colossal silent disk, forever imprinted on his subconscious. The connection was undeniable. This wasn't just a relic, it was a key, and it resonated with something deep within him, a primordial echo he couldn't explain, a genetic memory perhaps. The desert winds picked up, swirling dust devils across the horizon, as if the land itself was agitated, murmuring ancient secrets into the arid air. A distant coyote howled, a mournful, drawn-out cry that seemed to carry the weight of untold millennia, a lament for lost truths. The world around Ethan was responding, slowly, subtly, to the awakening he had just initiated. He wasn't merely observing history, he was becoming a part of it, a crucial, unwitting player in a story far older than humanity itself. The question was no longer if he would find the truth, but what the truth would demand of him and what it would cost him. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and a newfound urgency that bordered on manic obsession, Ethan worked tirelessly. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the shifting angle of the merciless sun and the sudden chilling drop in desert temperatures, which offered little respite from the strange coldness emanating from the ground. He set up a temporary camp, a small utilitarian tent, shielding himself from the elements, but not from the relentless hum of the metallic plate, which now pulsed with a more consistent rhythm, a silent, pervasive heartbeat beneath the earth. He felt it in his chest, in his skull, an omnipresent reminder of the magnitude of his discovery, a constant thrumming in his very bones. Sleep became a luxury he could not afford, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. He meticulously documented everything: digital scans of the plate, detailed photographs of the surrounding petroglyphs, geological samples of the unusual, almost sterile soil. He brought out specialized equipment, ground-penetrating radar, seismic sensors, magnetic anomaly detectors, all configured to their most sensitive settings. The readings were baffling, defying every conventional scientific explanation. The metallic plate extended far beyond the visible surface, stretching down into the earth for an unknown depth, a massive, artificial structure buried millennia ago, its contours hidden beneath layers of rock. The material registered as something entirely unknown, incredibly dense, yet subtly pliable, almost alive to the touch, reacting to slight atmospheric changes. Its magnetic signature was erratic, fluctuating with the rhythm of the hum, creating localized gravitational distortions that made his hair stand on end. It defied every known scientific principle, challenging the very foundations of physics as he understood it. One evening, as the desert sky transformed into a breathtaking canvas of purple and orange, streaked with the first nascent stars, glittering like scattered diamonds, Ethan studied the petroglyphs again. He had cleaned them, traced them, compared them to hundreds of known indigenous carvings from various regions across the southwest. The segmented eye symbol on the plate was clearly represented in several carvings, often depicted with figures pointing towards it or kneeling before it, as if in reverence or perhaps fearful worship. But there was one cluster, high up on a sheer rock face, almost obscured by centuries of wind erosion and the relentless desert sun, that he had overlooked in his initial, less focused surveys. He climbed carefully, scaling the treacherous rock face, his fingers finding purchase in the ancient fissures and handholds worn smooth by time, his mind solely focused on the ancient artistry. Reaching the cluster, he gasped, a choked sound of disbelief escaping his lips. The carvings were distinctly different. They depicted not only the segmented eye, but also elongated, almost ethereal figures with large heads and almond-shaped eyes, adorned with strange, intricate garments that seemed to shimmer even in the unyielding stone. And above them unmistakably was a giant winged disk, not unlike the one he had seen in his fleeting vision, dominating the scene. These figures weren't human, nor were they any animal known to the indigenous tribes, or even any terrestrial species for that matter. They were visitors, celestial beings, and they were depicted interacting with the early inhabitants of this land, bestowing knowledge, tools, and seemingly a sense of awe and worship, standing tall above the smaller human figures. The narrative etched into the rock was undeniable, a history of intervention. His mind raced, connecting the dots with a terrifying clarity. The gods of these ancient people, the sky people who descended from above, the myths and legends that mainstream archaeology dismissed as mere primitive imaginings, quaint stories for an unsophisticated populace. What if they weren't myths at all? What if they were fragmented memories, distorted through generations of actual physical encounters? He thought of ancient Sumerian texts, of the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, of Egyptian gods, Mayan deities, Hindu devas. All across the globe, similar stories of celestial beings descending from the sky, bringing civilization, knowledge, and sometimes destruction. Could this small, unassuming patch of Utah desert be a forgotten outpost, a silent monument to their presence, a landing strip for cosmic visitors? As he traced the contours of a winged figure on the rock, his finger brushing against the ancient pigment, a sudden, sharp pain shot through his head, behind his eyes like a needle pricking his brain, momentarily disorienting him. He swayed precariously, clutching the rock face for support, his vision blurring. Then a vivid image flared in his mind, clear as day, overriding his physical senses, a vast, swirling nebula of dust and gas coalescing into a colossal planet, crimson and scarred, with two smaller, brighter celestial bodies orbiting it, a gravitational ballet in the depths of space, Nibiru, the forbidden realm, the 12th planet, the planet spoken of in hushed tones in ancient texts, dismissed by modern astronomy as a myth, a rogue planet or a brown dwarf, a gravitational anomaly. But here, in his mind's eye, it was undeniably real, a vibrant, terrifying celestial body radiating an intense, raw energy. The image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him dizzy and disoriented, gasping for breath. He slid down the rock face, landing heavily on the dusty ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to clear the lingering visual imprint. The faint afterimage burned into his retina. This was more than a presage now. It was a direct intrusion, a mental download, a telepathic message. The metallic plate, the petroglyphs, the visions, they were all intertwined, pieces of a cosmic puzzle that was slowly, terrifyingly falling into place, revealing a design far grander than any human could conceive. He looked at the vast, indifferent desert around him, the emerging stars winking down from their infinite distance. He felt infinitesimally small, yet inextricably linked to something unimaginably vast, a cosmic drama unfolding. This was it. This was the moment of discovery, the partial truth he had been subconsciously seeking, the confirmation of his deepest, most radical suspicions. It wasn't just ancient humans, it was ancient visitors, beings who sculpted the very fabric of early civilizations, guided their development, and then perhaps left. And the metallic plate wasn't just a relic. It was a connection, a communication device, a fragment of their technology, a dormant transmitter. It connected his world, the world of dusty artifacts and academic debates, to the sprawling cosmic tapestry of the ancient gods, revealing them not as mythical figures, but as flesh and blood, if alien, entities. But he still didn't understand the full scope of it, the true nature of their power, or their ultimate purpose. What did they want? Why had they left? And why now was their silence finally breaking? The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the weight of impending revelations, a sense of destiny looming. He felt a chilling certainty that he was no longer merely a researcher. He was an unwitting participant in a millennia-old drama, and the curtain was just beginning to rise, revealing a stage far grander than Earth. The desert nights grew colder, the silence deeper, almost suffocating as Ethan pressed on with his frantic research. The humming from the metallic plate became a constant companion, a low, resonant thrum that permeated his dreams, filling them with fragmented images of swirling cosmic dust, colossal, impossible structures, and beings of immense, silent power, their forms vaguely humanoid, but undeniably alien. He stopped sleeping properly, existing on adrenaline and the unwavering conviction that he was on the verge of something monumental, something that would rewrite every history book. His skin felt perpetually cold, a residual chill from the artifact, and his senses were heightened, almost painfully so, picking up every minute detail, every subtle shift in the environment. Every rustle of a nocturnal creature, every distant whisper of the wind, felt amplified, imbued with a new, unsettling significance, as if the desert itself was communicating with him. He spent hours trying to decipher the intricate symbols etched into the plate. They weren't hieroglyphs or cuneiform. They were a language of pure geometry, a complex matrix of interlocking lines and glowing dots that shifted subtly under his gaze, as if responding to his presence, to the very thoughts forming in his mind. He tried different frequencies of light, ultraviolet, infrared, variations in magnetic fields, even subtle sonic pulses from a specialized emitter. Nothing seemed to elicit a strong, discernible reaction beyond the persistent hum. It was a lock without a key, a message without a Rosetta Stone, a communication system designed for a different species. Yet the hum persisted, a silent, insistent invitation to a conversation he couldn't yet fully understand, a promise of revelation. His mind was a maelstrom of theories and frantic calculations, swirling like the desert dust. If the petroglyphs depicted alien beings interacting with ancient humans, and if the metallic plate was their technology, what was its ultimate purpose? Was it a power source, dormant for millennia? A communication device, awaiting a signal? A map to a forgotten realm? The idea of Nibiru, the rouge planet from his vision, loomed large in his thoughts, a crimson spectre in his mind's eye. Ancient Sumerian texts spoke of the Anunnaki arriving from Nibiru, a celestial body with a long elliptical orbit that brought it close to Earth every few thousand years. They were described as giant, wise, and powerful beings who established the first human civilizations, taught us agriculture, writing, and astronomy, and even, according to some interpretations, genetically engineered humanity itself, shaping us in their image for unknown purposes. Mainstream science dismissed Nibiru as a myth, a figment of ancient imagination, a baseless astrological speculation. But the visions, the pulsating artifact, the impossible petroglyphs, they all pointed to a truth far stranger than fiction, a reality that defied easy categorization. What if Nibiru wasn't a myth, but a reality, a forgotten member of our solar system, perhaps even its true progenitor? What if the Anunnaki weren't gods, but extraterrestrial visitors who simply possessed technology so advanced it seemed magical, divine to primitive humans? And if they were real, and if they influenced human history to such a profound extent, then what did that mean for everything else humanity believed about itself, its unique genesis, its singular journey, its place in the cosmos? The questions swirled in his mind, each one opening a new abyss of doubt and wonder, threatening to consume him. He continued his scans of the area around the plate, meticulously mapping every square foot. The ground-penetrating radar, initially showing only solid rock and geological strata, now began to reveal faint, anomalous readings deeper down beneath hundreds of feet of sandstone. A vast, cavernous space, impossibly symmetrical, directly beneath the plate. It wasn't a natural cave system, wasn't a product of erosion or tectonic shifts. It was constructed, artificial, and enormous, spanning an area far wider and deeper than any known human excavation. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a surface artifact, it was part of something vast, buried beneath the desert floor, a gateway, a hidden temple, a forgotten city waiting to be rediscovered. As he tried to recalibrate his senses to get a clearer, more detailed image of the subterranean structure, refining the algorithms to cut through geological interference, a sudden, jarring sound cut through the profound desert silence. A distant thump, followed by the faint but unmistakable roar of a powerful engine growing rapidly louder. Ethan froze, his heart leaping into his throat, a primal fear seizing him. He wasn't supposed to be here. This was his private, unsanctioned dig, a secret endeavor. He had gone to great lengths to ensure his solitude, meticulously covering his tracks. He grabbed his binoculars, scanning the horizon, his hands trembling. A plume of dust rose in the distance, growing larger, black against the fading light of dusk, heading directly towards his camp. A black SUV, sleek and ominous, cutting through the rugged terrain with an impossible speed, defying the rough landscape. Panic, cold and visceral, seized him, constricting his lungs. He had been so careful, so discreet. Who could have known? He instantly thought of Dr. Thorne, his old mentor. Had Thorne, in a moment of concern or perhaps a misguided attempt to protect Ethan from some unseen danger, alerted someone? Or was it something far more sinister, a force he hadn't yet identified? His mind raced, recalling the quiet dismissals, the averted gazes, the unspoken warnings he'd received from various colleagues whenever he strayed too close to uncomfortable topics that brushed against the fringes of accepted history. The academic world, he now realized, was not always about truth. Sometimes it was about maintaining the established narrative, protecting powerful interests, or perhaps simply fear. A collective, ingrained fear of what truly lay beyond the boundaries of their understanding. He scrambled to cover the metallic plate with sand and pebbles, desperately trying to conceal his discovery, to make it disappear back into the desert floor. His hands trembled, fumbling with the trowel, the brush, the bags of dirt he had carefully excavated. The humming from the plate seemed to intensify, mocking his efforts, its blue light pulsing more brightly, as if actively resisting its reburial. It felt as if the artifact itself was aware of the approaching threat, mocking his frantic attempts at concealment, asserting its undeniable presence. The SUV was closer now, its black silhouette stark against the setting sun, its tinted windows reflecting the last rays of light like cold, unfeeling eyes. As the SUV screeched to a halt a few hundred yards away, kicking up a furious cloud of red dust that temporarily obscured their forms, Ethan dropped his trowel, the metallic clang echoing eerily in the sudden silence. 3 figures emerged, dressed in dark, tactical gear, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses and balaclavas, rendering them faceless, anonymous. They moved with a military precision that left no doubt about their training or intent. They weren't archaeologists. They weren't government officials in any recognizable capacity. They were operatives, highly trained and efficient, and they were here for him, or more accurately, for what he had found, for the secret he had disturbed. One of them raised a hand, pointing directly at Ethan with an unwavering finger. A cold dread, heavier than any academic scorn, settled deep in his gut. This wasn't about theories anymore. This was about survival. He was no longer just chasing history. He was being hunted by it, or by the forces that sought to control it. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The world was not just passively forgetting. The world was actively hiding. And he, Ethan Vance, had just stumbled upon a secret that someone, somewhere, desperately wanted to keep buried, a truth they would kill to keep concealed. A tense, suffocating silence descended upon the desert, punctuated only by the distant, rhythmic hum of the metallic plate and the quickening, frantic thud of Ethan's heart, which pounded like a drum against his ribs. He felt a profound, unsettling shift in the dynamics of his situation. He was no longer just an academic on a fringe dig, an eccentric scholar pursuing obscure theories. He was an obstacle, a threat, standing squarely between these shadowy figures and a secret they deemed too dangerous for humanity, too vital to their own control. The fear was still present, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now tempered by a fierce resolve, a burning defiance that surprised even himself. He had come too far, uncovered too much, and felt too deeply the weight of this impending truth to simply surrender now. "Ethan Vance?" one of the figures asked, his voice a low, gravelly monotone, devoid of inflection or emotion, delivered through a built-in comm system in his balaclava. It was a statement, not a question, delivered with a chilling certainty, as if he were merely confirming a known fact. Ethan could only nod, his throat suddenly dry, his voice caught somewhere in his chest, refusing to cooperate. He tried to swallow, to clear his constricted airway, but it was futile. His mouth felt like sandpaper, his eyes darted from face to face, searching for any hint of humanity, any flicker of recognition, any sign of individuality, but found none. They were perfectly disciplined, their gazes unwavering, focused solely on him, like predatory machines. "You've unearthed something you shouldn't have," another operative stated, stepping closer, his boots crunching softly on the loose desert pebbles. He gestured towards the hastily covered metallic plate with a gloved hand, a dismissive flick of his wrist. The gesture was dismissive, as if Ethan's desperate attempts at concealment were laughably inadequate, already observed and catalogued. "We've been monitoring your unique pursuits for some time, Dr. Vance, since you first took an interest in the anomalies surrounding the San Juan Basin." The words struck Ethan like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole his breath. Monitoring his unique pursuits. This wasn't a sudden, reactive discovery based on a recent anomaly. This was a long-term surveillance operation, meticulously planned and executed. They had known, all this time, as he delved into forgotten texts and scoured remote landscapes, thinking he was alone in his quest, a solitary seeker of truth. He had been watched. Every anomaly he'd chased, every theory he'd whispered into his dictaphone, every speculative email he'd sent to his few trusted fringe colleagues, all of it had been logged, analyzed, scrutinized, every keystroke, every GPS coordinate. The academic dismissals, the quiet rejections, the constant struggle for funding suddenly took on a far more sinister hue. It wasn't just skepticism. It was a carefully constructed barrier designed to keep people like him away from truths like this, away from sites like this. A third operative, leaner and quicker in his movements, silently circled behind Ethan, effectively cutting off any escape route, silently completing their encirclement. The desert, once a symbol of freedom and boundless discovery, now felt like a vast, open prison, its immense expanse closing in on him. The air crackled with a palpable tension, thick and suffocating, tasting of dust and ozone. "We advise you to cooperate, Dr. Vance," the first operative continued, his voice still unnervingly calm, a disturbing contrast to the gravity of the situation. "Your research, your findings, they represent a significant breach of protocol, a danger to global stability, to the delicate balance we have meticulously maintained for centuries." Global stability. The phrase echoed in Ethan's mind, hollow and absurd, yet also chillingly potent. What danger could ancient petroglyphs and a metallic plate pose to global stability? Unless the truth they represented was so profound, so paradigm-shattering, that it threatened the very foundations of human society, every institution, every belief system. He thought of his theories about the Anunnaki, about Nibiru, about human origins. If those theories were true, if this artifact was indeed a direct link to those ancient, powerful beings, then global stability would indeed be irrevocably shattered. Everything humanity believed about itself, its unique genesis, its singular journey, its supposed autonomy, would be revealed as a carefully constructed illusion, a grand deception. He looked back at the metallic plate, a faint blue light still pulsing from beneath the thin layer of sand and pebbles, refusing to be fully obscured. The humming was no longer just an internal sensation. It felt like a silent accusation, a question posed by the ancient artifact itself. What will you do? Will you let them bury me again? Will you let them bury the truth? The image of Dr. Thorne, his old mentor, flickered in his mind again, but this time with a horrifying clarity, illuminated by the cold blue light. Thorne hadn't simply retreated from the edge. He had been pulled back, forced into compliance. He hadn't just dismissed Ethan's theories as academic folly. He had been forced to dismiss them, to recant his own findings. The knowing glances, the averted gazes, the sudden change in Thorne's demeanor years ago, it all clicked into place with a sickening thud, a cold, hard realization. Thorne had made similar discoveries, perhaps even stumbled upon this very site, or something like it, pushing too close to the forbidden knowledge. And they, these faceless operatives or others like them, had found him. They had silenced him, not with overt violence, but with a more insidious threat, a pressure so immense that even a brilliant, daring mind like Thorne's had buckled, yielding to the will of an unseen power. This was the second emotional explosion, a truth more devastating than any physical threat. The realization that his mentor, a man he had deeply respected, a fellow seeker of truth, had not only succumbed, but had been made to succumb, was a profound betrayal, not just of academic integrity, but of the very pursuit of knowledge, of the fundamental human right to know. Thorne hadn't just forgotten, he had been made to forget, or at least made to act as if he had forgotten, to publicly disavow his life's work. This was a deliberate cover-up, a meticulously maintained deception on a scale Ethan could barely comprehend, stretching across centuries, perhaps millennia. It wasn't just history that was incomplete, it was our entire perception of reality. That was a lie, a carefully curated illusion designed to keep humanity ignorant. "What is this?" Ethan finally managed to croak, finding his voice, though it was barely a whisper, a strained sound in the vast silence. "What do you want with it? What are you afraid of?" "We want the artifact, Dr. Vance," the first operative replied, his voice still eerily calm, emotionless. "And your cooperation in forgetting you ever saw it. In forgetting you ever came here." He took another step forward, closing the distance between them, his shadow falling over Ethan. "The truth, in this instance, is not for public consumption. Some secrets are best left buried, for the good of all, for the preservation of society as we know it." The words hung in the arid desert air, heavy with unspoken threats, with the chilling weight of absolute authority. Ethan looked at the metallic plate, then back at the impassive, unyielding figures. He had a choice: acquiesce, erase his discovery, or fight. But how could one man fight against forces so powerful they could rewrite history and silence dissent with such efficiency? He felt a surge of defiance, a burning refusal to let this millennia-old secret be reburied, to let his own mind be wiped clean. He wouldn't be like Thorn, he couldn't be. The truth, however dangerous, however unsettling, had to come out, no matter the cost. The climate grew colder, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long, unsettling shadows across the scene, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous spectres. The confrontation had begun, not just for an artifact, but for the very soul of human history, for the right to know. If you've made it this far without hitting pause, it's because this has resonated with you. So, strengthen this content. Hit like now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. A tense, unbearable silence descended once more, punctuated only by the distant rhythmic hum of the metallic plate, now growing perceptibly louder, and the increasingly frantic thud of Ethan's heart, which felt like a trapped bird against his ribs. He felt a profound shift in the dynamics of his situation, from a researcher to an active participant in a cosmic drama. He was no longer just an academic on a fringe dig. He was an obstacle, a threat, standing squarely between these shadowy figures and a secret they deemed too dangerous for humanity, too vital to their own control. The fear was still present, a cold knot in his stomach, a primal scream lodged in his throat, but it was now tempered by a fierce, unyielding resolve, a burning defiance that surprised even himself. He had come too far, uncovered too much, and felt too deeply the weight of this impending truth to simply surrender now. "I won't just forget," Ethan stated, his voice gaining strength, a tremor of defiance running through it, a challenge thrown into the face of absolute power. "This isn't just a rock, an old piece of metal. This is everything. It changes everything we know about ourselves, about our place in the universe." The first operative, the one who seemed to be in charge, simply tilted his head slightly, a gesture that conveyed an unnerving calm, a profound, almost detached certainty. "And that is precisely why it must remain buried, Dr. Vance. Humanity is not ready for everything. Order, stability, the collective illusion of progress. These are fragile things. Shattering them with uncomfortable truths only leads to chaos, to anarchy, to a breakdown of everything that gives our civilization meaning." His voice was still calm, almost paternal, which only made his words more chilling, more sinister. It was the calm of someone who believed absolutely, fanatically in their mission, however sinister or deceptive it might be. As he spoke, the operative took another step, then another, slowly closing the distance between them with a predatory grace. Ethan instinctively backed away, his eyes scanning for an escape route, however improbable, however suicidal. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a vast, indifferent canvas offering no cover, no solace, no hope of escape. The other two operatives maintained their strategic positions, silently boxing him in, their presence a cold, inescapable reality. The air crackled with a palpable tension, thick and suffocating, tasting of dust and ozone, a storm brewing beneath the surface. Suddenly, the metallic plate, still partially covered, pulsed with an almost blinding blue light, cutting through the twilight gloom. The humming escalated, vibrating through the ground, through Ethan's boots, making his teeth rattle, sending a powerful resonance through his very bones. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical force, a wave of pure energy emanating from the earth, from the depths of the ancient artifact. The operatives, for the first time, showed a flicker of discomfort, their movements hesitating, their perfectly composed stances wavering slightly. Their rigid discipline was cracking under the weight of the impossible. "It's reacting to you," Ethan whispered, a surge of adrenaline pushing through his fear, transforming it into a strange exhilaration. He wasn't sure if he meant the plate was reacting to him or to them, or to the very tension in the air, but the sudden, powerful display of energy was undeniable, irrefutable. The blue light cast eerie, shifting shadows across their masked faces, making them seem even more inhuman, more spectral. The lead operative regained his composure quickly, his eyes narrowing behind the dark lenses. "Irrelevant. The device will be neutralized. You will be escorted." His tone left no doubt as to the finality of that escort, a chilling euphemism for something far more permanent than a ride home. But as he spoke, the ground beneath them began to tremble, subtly at first. A faint internal vibration, then with increasing intensity, a deep, resonant rumble that rose from deep within the earth, a sound unlike any earthquake Ethan had ever felt. It was organic, almost a groan, a lament, as if the planet itself was awakening from a long, troubled slumber. Small pebbles danced on the metallic plate, then began to levitate slightly, shimmering in the blue light, defying gravity. The petroglyphs on the nearby rock face, catching the blue glow, seemed to pulse with an internal life, their ancient lines shifting, moving, almost morphing, as if coming alive, telling their story once more. The operatives looked at each other, a hint of genuine unease, even fear finally breaking through their disciplined facades. Their carefully constructed plans were unraveling before their eyes. This was clearly beyond their expected parameters. They were prepared for a man, perhaps even a struggle, but not for the desert itself to come alive, not for the very earth to revolt. Ethan, however, felt a strange sense of exhilaration mixed with terror, a dizzying cocktail of emotions. The visions, the hum, the petroglyphs, they were all connected, pieces of a grander design. The artifact wasn't just reacting, it was responding to his presence, to their intrusion, to some unseen cosmic trigger. He reached out a hand instinctively, almost subconsciously, towards the glowing plate, a primal urge driving him forward. "Don't touch it!" the lead operative barked, finally losing his composure, his voice cracking with urgency, a raw, human fear breaking through his controlled demeanor. He lunged forward, but it was too late. As Ethan's hand hovered above the plate, without even making physical contact, the symbols etched into its surface exploded with light. Not just blue, but a kaleidoscope of vibrant, alien colors, emerald green, ruby red, amethyst purple, swirling and intertwining in a complex, mesmerizing dance, casting brilliant, pulsating shadows across the canyon walls. The humming transformed into a resonant chord, a symphony of frequencies that bypassed his ears and vibrated directly into his brain, a language of pure energy. The ground shuddered violently, throwing the operatives off balance, their movements becoming less coordinated, their disciplined formation broken, dissolving into chaotic disarray. A crack appeared in the sandstone adjacent to the metallic plate, quickly widening, spewing forth a cloud of fine phosphorescent dust that swirled upwards, catching the multicolored light, illuminating the expanding fissure. The crack wasn't jagged or random. It was precise, almost surgical, following an invisible seam in the rock, revealing a hidden architecture. And from within the newly formed fissure, a faint, crystalline sound emerged, like the tinkling of ancient bells or the distant song of celestial chimes, beckoning him forward. This was the Virada too, not just a partial truth, but a larger, more undeniable discovery, physically manifesting before their eyes. The earth was opening, revealing something vast and ancient, something deliberately concealed. The metallic plate wasn't merely a piece of technology, it was a key, not just to knowledge, but to a physical gateway, a portal to another reality. It was directly connecting his world to the ancient gods, proving their physical, undeniable presence, not just in myth, but beneath the very ground he stood on. The discovery was no longer theoretical, it was tangible, threatening, and terrifyingly real. Ethan could feel a surge of pure energy emanating from the fissure, a magnetic pull, an undeniable invitation that resonated deep within his soul. The tension was no longer merely palpable. It was an explosive force, tearing open the very fabric of reality, revealing the forbidden realm. The ground beneath them continued to convulse, the deep, guttural rumble amplifying into a deafening roar that echoed through the desert canyon, threatening to deafen Ethan. The multicolored light from the metallic plate flared, illuminating the expanding fissure in the sandstone, turning the ancient rock into a canvas of shifting alien hues. What had begun as a crack now split wide, revealing a dark, impossibly deep chasm that seemed to swallow the light, an abyss reaching into the bowels of the earth. A torrent of phosphorescent dust billowed out, swirling around Ethan and the operatives, stinging their eyes, coating their skin, and filling the air with a faint metallic scent that was both acrid and strangely sweet, like raw electricity mixed with ancient incense. The crystalline chimes intensified, coalescing into a complex, melodic sequence that resonated with an almost hypnotic quality, a song older than time itself. It was a sound both ancient and futuristic, a harmony that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly with the core of his being, a language understood not by logic, but by intuition. Ethan felt an overwhelming, undeniable urge to step closer, to peer into the abyss, drawn by an invisible current, a magnetic pull towards the unknown. The operatives, however, were scrambling, their previous composure shattered, their discipline dissolved into primal panic. They exchanged panicked glances through their night vision goggles, their calm directives replaced by urgent, desperate whispered commands into their comms units, their voices laced with genuine fear. Whatever their organization was, whatever protocols they followed, this was clearly outside their operational manual, beyond their capacity to control. As the fissure widened, revealing more of the hidden structure beneath, Ethan could discern vast geometric shapes, not carved from natural rock, but molded from a dark, obsidian-like material that absorbed light, a seamless alien architecture. It was impossibly smooth, reflecting the swirling phosphorescence with an eerie glow, hinting at a technology far beyond human comprehension. He saw glimpses of colossal arches, vast, intricate pathways leading into the darkness, and towering monolithic columns stretching down into the earth for an immeasurable distance, supporting a subterranean world. This was not a small chamber. It was an entire subterranean complex, a city buried beneath the desert floor, a relic of a forgotten civilization. And it was awakening, slowly, inexorably, revealing its true nature. "This is impossible," one of the operatives muttered, his voice hoarse with disbelief, raw with terror, as he struggled to maintain his footing against the violent tremors, his eyes wide with incomprehension. "It's a gateway," Ethan stated, his voice ringing with a strange, almost manic certainty, pushing past the terror that threatened to consume him. He wasn't just hypothesizing anymore. He knew. The fragmented visions, the ancient texts, the persistent hum of the artifact, it all converged on this singular, undeniable truth. This was a portal, a dormant entry point, now activated, opening between worlds. He looked at the petroglyphs again, catching the multicolored light, their etched lines now seeming to deepen, to vibrate with latent energy. The winged figures seemed to be observing the scene, their silent, ancient eyes following his movements, their etched faces now seeming to hold an expression of anticipation, of ancient patience finally rewarded. Were they a record, a warning, or a welcome, an invitation to step into the forbidden realm? The humming from the plate crescendoed into a deafening roar, and with a final cataclysmic groan, a vast section of the sandstone above the chasm imploded inwards, showering the area with ancient rock and dust, momentarily obscuring everything. When the dust settled, what was revealed was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. A perfectly circular aperture, at least 30 feet in diameter, had opened directly beneath the metallic plate. It glowed with a soft, ethereal blue light, forming a shimmering, almost liquid surface, like water rippling in an impossible current, a window into another dimension. It was the gateway, and from within that gateway, a distinct, powerful energy pulsed outwards, warm and inviting, yet undeniably alien, a cosmic breath filling the air. It was a draw so potent it made Ethan's every fiber vibrate, a resonance that echoed in his very soul. He felt a profound sense of recognition, as if he were looking at something he had always known, always searched for, always been destined to find. It was a window into the forbidden realm, a direct link to Nibiru, to the Anunnaki themselves, their true home. The operatives, however, seemed to have reached their breaking point. They began to retreat, stumbling backwards, their carefully constructed discipline crumbling under the weight of the impossible, their training utterly useless against this reality. "Fall back! Fall back!" the lead operative yelled, his voice laced with genuine fear, with a primal animalistic panic. "This is not within parameters. We need extraction. We need to abort." But as they turned to flee, a new sound emerged from the gateway, a deep, resonant thrum, like the beating of a colossal drum, accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine that seemed to pierce directly into the brain, bypassing the ears. And then, from the shimmering blue surface, shadowy forms began to emerge, slowly, gracefully, yet with immense power. They were immense, humanoid, but impossibly tall, easily 12 to 15 feet in height, with broad shoulders and elongated limbs. Their skin seemed to shimmer with an internal light, a subtle phosphorescence, and what appeared to be vast feathery wings were folded elegantly against their backs, rippling with unseen energy. Their heads were large, with prominent brows and deep-set eyes that glowed with an ancient, knowing intelligence, a profound wisdom that predated human history. The Anunnaki. Ethan froze, mesmerized, utterly captivated by their appearance. They weren't gods in the spiritual sense, not beings of divine light and myth, but immensely powerful, technologically advanced beings, exactly as depicted in the ancient Sumerian texts and the petroglyphs. Their appearance was both majestic and utterly terrifying, a perfect balance of awe and dread. They radiated an aura of unimaginable power, of knowledge beyond human comprehension, of a civilization that had mastered the very fabric of reality. He felt a sudden, sharp pain, a piercing jab in his arm. He looked down to see the lead operative, who had hesitated for a moment too long, now pointing a strange, futuristic device at him. A small, glowing projectile, a tiny dart, was embedded in his skin. Before Ethan could react, his vision blurred, his muscles seized, and a wave of overwhelming dizziness washed over him, threatening to engulf him entirely. The operative, his face pale with fear and urgency, had chosen to neutralize Ethan rather than engage with the emerging entities, a desperate act of self-preservation. "Some secrets are best left buried, Dr. Vance," the operative shouted, his voice echoing as the ground continued to rumble, as the Anunnaki continued to emerge. "And some truths are too dangerous for humanity to ever comprehend." He turned and fled, joining his retreating team, leaving Ethan alone before the gateway, before the silent, majestic figures. As Ethan's legs gave out and he collapsed onto the trembling ground, his eyes fixed on the emerging figures, A final, horrifying truth struck him, clearer than any vision. The device the operative had used wasn't just a tranquilizer. It was a memory wipe. A truth suppression tool specifically designed to erase inconvenient knowledge. He saw it in the operative's desperate eyes, heard it in his frantic voice. They weren't just burying secrets, they were erasing them from the minds of those who found them, from the collective consciousness. This wasn't just a lie discovered, it was a deliberate, ongoing manipulation of human consciousness itself, a millennia-old program of ignorance. This was the third emotional explosion, a profound betrayal that tore at the very fabric of his being, far more painful than any physical wound. He had stumbled not just upon a hidden history, but upon an active, living conspiracy that spanned millennia, a web of deceit carefully woven to keep humanity blind, ignorant of its true heritage. And now he was its latest victim. As his vision faded, swallowed by a wave of induced oblivion, the last thing he saw was the immense, glowing figures of the Anunnaki stepping through the gateway, their silent, ancient eyes fixed upon him, a look of profound, almost paternal observation. If you've made it this far without hitting pause, it's because this has resonated with you. So, strengthen this content. Hit like now and send it to someone who needs to see this. The world dissolved into a chaotic cacophony of distorted light and sound, then faded to an inky blackness, a void that felt both empty and strangely oppressive. When Ethan awoke, it was to the gentle, rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights and the sterile, antiseptic scent of a hospital room, a stark contrast to the elemental harshness of the desert. The desert was gone. The immense figures, the pulsating gateway, the frantic operatives, all of it was a jumbled, fragmented nightmare, a fever dream born of exhaustion and an overactive imagination, a figment of a mind pushed to its limits. Or so he was told, with reassuring smiles and soft voices. A kind-faced nurse, her uniform crisp and white, her demeanor radiating professional calm, explained that he had been found unconscious near an old abandoned mine shaft, suffering from severe dehydration and a minor concussion. He was lucky, she said, to have been found by a passing hiker just in time. His gear was still with him, miraculously intact, though his laptop had been damaged beyond repair in the fall, she explained. A team of specialists had already recovered his data, she assured him, and everything was fine, he just needed rest. It was a convenient narrative, too neat, too polished, too perfectly aligned with the mundane. It grated against a lingering unease, a phantom itch in the back of his mind, a persistent whisper that something was profoundly wrong. He was told he had rambled about ancient gods and celestial gates in his delirium, speaking of things that made no sense. The doctors attributed it to heat stroke, exhaustion, and the shock of his ordeal. They prescribed rest, hydration, and a mild sedative to help him sleep, to quell the persistent nightmares he reported. He tried to remember desperately, straining against the invisible barrier in his mind. He strained to recall the exact details of the dreams, the symbols, the cold metallic touch, the overwhelming presence of the emerging entities. But it was like trying to grasp smoke or hold water in cupped hands. The more he tried, the more it slipped away, leaving only a vague sense of loss, a profound emptiness where something vitally important should have been, a gaping hole in his recent memory. The memory wipe, delivered by the operative's device, had been terrifyingly effective, surgical in its precision. Days bled into weeks, blurring into an indistinct haze. Ethan was released from the hospital, returning to his cluttered office in Boulder, Colorado. The hum of the metallic plate was gone, replaced by the mundane drone of city traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of everyday life. The vibrant desert colors were replaced by the muted grays and browns of urban concrete, the endless blue sky confined by skyscrapers. He tried to pick up his research, to continue his pursuit of historical anomalies, to find the passion that had once consumed him. But the spark, The burning conviction that had driven him for years was diminished, dulled, almost extinguished. It was as if a vital part of his intellectual soul had been amputated. He looked at his old notes, his meticulously organized maps, his categorized files on ancient civilizations. They felt hollow, disconnected, like someone else's work. He knew the theories, he could articulate the arguments, but the visceral certainty, the intuitive leaps that had always guided him, were gone. He felt empty, a profound sense of intellectual fatigue settling over him, a ghost in his own intellectual pursuit, haunted by a memory he couldn't grasp. His mind would wander, his gaze unfocusing, caught in a strange, melancholic lethargy. He would stare at a blank wall, trying to conjure the images that once fueled his obsession, but they remained stubbornly out of reach, just beyond the veil of conscious thought. His colleagues, the ones who had once dismissed him, now regarded him with a mix of pity and quiet satisfaction. "It seems Ethan has finally come to his senses," he overheard one of them say, a smug tone in their voice, over coffee in the department break room. All that talk of ancient aliens, really. Quite a phase he was going through. Good that he's grounded again. He found he couldn't even summon the energy to be angry, to defend himself. The fire wasn't there. It had been extinguished. He tried to contact Dr. Thorne, hoping for some shred of shared understanding, some echo of their past intellectual camaraderie, some clue about what had truly happened. But Thorne's phone went straight to voicemail, his emails went unanswered, his office line permanently disconnected. Ethan even visited Thorne's empty office at the university, finding it cleared out, a leave of absence notice tacked to the door, a flimsy explanation. Another victim, or merely a convenient disappearance, meticulously orchestrated. Ethan felt a cold dread, but it was distant, dulled, like a memory of a fear rather than the fear itself, a chilling but muted premonition. One afternoon, sifting through a box of old physical research materials, printouts, photocopies, hand-drawn sketches, he stumbled upon a small, unassuming rock. It was dark, almost black, with faint, iridescent specks embedded in its surface, glinting subtly in the light. He didn't remember collecting it, didn't have a label for it, no field notes detailing its origin. He picked it up, turning it over in his fingers, its weight surprisingly dense for its size. It was cold to the touch, unusually so, despite being stored in a warm room, its surface radiating a subtle chill. And as his fingers brushed against its smooth, dark surface, he felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible hum emanating from within the stone. It was identical to the hum that had resonated from the metallic plate in his fading nightmare, a familiar vibration that echoed deep within his bones. The coldness, the hum, they were distinct, undeniable, unmistakable. It was like a tiny, frozen ember, a dying spark of the immense power he had encountered. And with that hum, a fragment of memory, a single, sharp image, flashed in his mind, cutting through the fog of amnesia, the segmented eye symbol, glowing blue, vibrant and alive. The small rock was clearly a fragment of the metallic plate, a piece he must have instinctively grabbed, or which had somehow become embedded in his gear during the chaos, a defiant shard of truth that had escaped the memory wipe, a silent witness. It was a tangible link to what he had forgotten, a physical anchor in a sea of erased experience, a solid piece of the puzzle that refused to be discarded. This was the fourth emotional explosion, a profound shock that tore through the fog of induced amnesia, a lightning bolt of clarity, the symbol appearing in the wrong place, the object awakening by its own accord, and the voice, a whisper, faint and almost drowned out by the static in his mind, but clear enough, a resonant plea. Remember. The implications were staggering, overwhelming. The memory wipe hadn't been total. A piece of the truth, however small, however dormant, however insignificant it might seem to others, had survived. He hadn't just forgotten, he had been made to forget. But a deeper, more primal part of him, or perhaps something within his very DNA, had resisted, had held onto a fragment of truth. This small rock, this fragment of alien technology, was proof. It was his last, desperate chance to reclaim his memories, to understand what had truly happened. He gripped the rock tightly, its coldness a welcome reassurance, its faint hum a whispered promise of what was to come. The world was not just silent, it was actively lying, and he, Ethan Vance, held a tiny, undeniable piece of the truth in his hand. He didn't know what to do next, or how to fight back against such an omnipresent, insidious force, but the fog was beginning to lift, and a new, terrifying clarity was beginning to dawn, illuminating a path he knew he had to follow. If you've made it this far without hitting pause, it's because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content, hit like now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The small, obsidian-like fragment became Ethan's secret companion, a constant chilling presence in his pocket, a silent anchor in a world striving to forget. He carried it everywhere, its faint, persistent hum, a steady counterpoint to the mundane rhythms of his life, a silent sentinel against the manufactured amnesia that still clung to the edges of his mind like persistent cobwebs. He spent hours examining it under various microscopes, trying different energy frequencies, probing its molecular structure with increasingly sophisticated, albeit makeshift, scientific instruments. It resisted all attempts at conventional analysis. It was incredibly dense, yet somehow translucent under certain light conditions, revealing faint, glowing veins within its dark interior, like a miniature dormant galaxy, pulsing with an inner light. The hum wasn't just physical, it was subtly psychic, resonating directly with his consciousness. As he held the fragment, he felt fleeting flashes of images, fragmented sounds like echoes from a distant dreamlike realm, piercing the veil of his forced oblivion. He saw colossal ships, vast and silent, gliding through the blackness of space, their hulls reflecting distant stars. He heard whispers in a language that wasn't a language in the human sense, but a pure stream of information, resonating directly in his consciousness, bypassing the need for words. It was overwhelming, disorienting, yet strangely compelling, like a forbidden law being slowly dripped into his mind. He was beginning to remember, not through conscious effort, but through a slow, insidious reawakening triggered by the fragment, a piece of himself being restitched. The more he interacted with the fragment, the more the fog began to recede, revealing clearer, sharper glimpses of the desert encounter. The black SUV, the masked operatives, the metallic plate, the immense, shadowy figures emerging from the gateway, they were no longer blurry like old photographs. They were sharp, vivid, undeniable, burning themselves into his mind. The profound sense of betrayal regarding Dr. Thorne resurfaced, sharper now, more painful, no longer a muted ache, but a searing wound. Thorne hadn't just disappeared, he had been silenced, perhaps permanently, a victim of the same insidious forces. Ethan himself had almost suffered the same fate, only by chance had a fragment of the truth remained. He realized the scale of the conspiracy was far greater than he had ever imagined, stretching far beyond his initial suspicions. This wasn't just about suppressing a single archaeological find or protecting a local secret. This was about controlling the narrative of human existence on a planetary scale, actively preventing humanity from knowing its true origins, its true potential, its true place in the cosmos. Why? What were they so afraid of? The Anunnaki, Nibiru, the possibility that humanity was not alone, or worse, not truly free, but a manipulated species. These were truths that would shatter every established institution, every religious doctrine, every scientific paradigm, every carefully constructed belief system. The thought filled him with both terror and a burning sense of moral imperative, a duty he couldn't ignore. He knew he couldn't go back to the desert site directly. They would be watching, observing every possible avenue of approach, every known access point. He needed to find another way, a back door, a new line of inquiry, a blind spot in their pervasive surveillance. He returned to his old research, but with a fresh, more cynical eye, no longer looking for validation, but for contradiction. He no longer looked for what was obvious or presented. He looked for what was missing, for the deliberate gaps, the inconsistencies, the whispers of suppression, the anomalies that had been surgically removed from public knowledge. He found it in ancient astronomical charts, particularly those of the Babylonian and Sumerian civilizations. There were subtle discrepancies, missing planets, impossible alignments that hinted at a celestial body not accounted for by modern astronomy, a ghost in the cosmic machine. He cross-referenced these with obscure mythological texts, finding recurring motifs of a red star or a winged planet that appeared in the heavens every few thousand years, bringing with it both cataclysms and advancements, periods of great destruction followed by sudden leaps in civilization. Nibiru. It was always Nibiru, woven into the very fabric of ancient cosmic understanding. He also started researching global patterns of strange, localized energy anomalies, unexplained magnetic fluctuations, gravitational distortions, even reports of phantom lights or sky cities in remote parts of the world, often dismissed as hoaxes or mass hysteria. These incidents were always dismissed as hoaxes, meteorological phenomena, or mass hysteria by mainstream media and science. But Ethan now saw a pattern, a coherent thread connecting the disparate events. They were concentrated in areas rich with ancient megalithic sites or in geological hot zones with unusual mineral compositions, places where the Earth's crust was thin or where ancient energies still simmered. They were, he suspected, the faint residual echoes of similar gateways, similar activations, or perhaps the subtle, pervasive influence of the Anunnaki themselves, their unseen presence still lingering. One evening, as he held the fragment, its hum growing noticeably stronger, more insistent, pulsating with a rhythmic urgency, a particularly vivid vision broke through the last vestiges of the memory wipe. He saw himself standing before the fully activated gateway, the colossal Anunnaki figures stepping through, their immense forms radiating power. He saw their immense almond-shaped eyes, filled with an ancient weariness, but also a profound purpose, a determination that had spanned millennia. And then he saw something else, something he hadn't fully processed in the initial shock, a detail that now burned with vital importance, a vast, intricate console within the gateway chamber, covered in the same geometric symbols as the fragment, and a distinct glowing inscription hovering above it, shimmering with an inner light. It was a command, not in words, but in pure intent, burning itself into his newly awakened memory. Connect, initiate, return. This was the Virada 4, the devastating truth, no longer fragmented, but coalescing into a coherent, terrifying whole. He had accessed a forbidden memory, a fragment of the past extraterrestrial encounter that had been deliberately suppressed, carefully erased. He now understood what the metallic plate was, not just a gateway but a control panel, a beacon, and the fragment he held was a key, perhaps even a piece of its operating system, a fragment of its core programming. He finally saw what was hidden, not just evidence of an ancient god, but a direct link to the Anunnaki themselves, their intentions and their technology, their very presence. The revelation was immense, intense, and cinematographic, yet it left something even larger pending, the ultimate purpose, the full truth of their return. He now knew what they were and what the gateway was for. But why and what would happen next? The chilling reality of their impending arrival was no longer a theory, it was an imminent certainty, a ticking clock counting down to a cosmic event. If you've made it this far without hitting pause, it's because this has resonated with you. So strengthen this content, hit like now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The urgency that had been dulled by the memory wipe now surged back, with an intensity that bordered on frantic, consuming Ethan's every thought, every waking moment. He felt like a man running against time, a silent cosmic clock ticking down to an unknown, inevitable event, a destiny he had unwittingly been drawn into. The fragment in his pocket no longer merely hummed. It pulsed with a subtle internal rhythm, growing warmer, as if drawing energy from an unseen source, or perhaps from the increasingly agitated thoughts in his own mind, a feedback loop of mounting tension. He knew with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones that the Anunnaki's return was not a distant prophecy. It was drawing near, an imminent reality. The gateway he had stumbled upon was not just a relic of their past presence, a forgotten monument, but an active portal, preparing for their imminent arrival, its energy signature growing stronger with each passing hour. He realized his only chance was to return to the site, to confront what he had found, to complete the connection before whatever shadowy forces that controlled the operatives could fully shut it down, or worse, before the Anunnaki themselves arrived and rendered humanity's understanding and his own existence utterly irrelevant. He couldn't go in blindly, not now. He needed a plan, equipment, and most importantly, more information, a deeper understanding of their intentions. He had to understand the initiate and return command to decipher its true meaning and purpose. His research became a desperate scramble, a frantic race against the celestial clock. He dove into ancient Sumerian texts again, but this time focusing on the most obscure, almost cryptic references to Nibiru's orbit and the Anunnaki's cyclical returns, searching for patterns, for anomalies in the data. He found obscure references to specific planetary alignments, celestial conjunctions that coincided with periods of great change and upheaval on Earth, major cataclysms, but also sudden leaps in human civilization, periods of accelerated development. The next alignment, according to these ancient astronomical calculations, was perilously close. Weeks, maybe months, not years, not millennia. The window of opportunity was rapidly closing. He revisited Dr. Thorne's old published works, scanning them for any hidden clues, any coded messages, anything that might point him in the right direction. Thorne, in his earlier, bolder days, had written extensively about the cosmic influences on early human development, hinting at an external intervention that accelerated evolution, a concept that had made him a pariah in mainstream academia. Ethan pored over these texts, searching for subtle shifts in terminology, for unusual footnotes, for any breadcrumb trail Thorne might have left behind, a silent warning or a hidden guide. He discovered a series of complex mathematical equations hidden within a seemingly innocuous paper on ancient agricultural techniques, equations that, when deciphered, appeared to be orbital mechanics calculations for a highly eccentric, long-period celestial body. Thorne, even when silenced, had tried to leave a message, a legacy of truth. He also recognized that he couldn't face this alone. The forces he was up against were too powerful, too pervasive. He needed help, but who could he trust in a world so thoroughly compromised? The world of academia was clearly corrupted. Government agencies were clearly involved in the cover-up, acting as enforcers of the lie. He thought of the few fringe theorists he had corresponded with, the ones who genuinely believed in unconventional narratives, the true outsiders. One name stood out: Dr. Lena Petrova, a brilliant but disgraced astrophysicist known for her outspoken theories on rogue planets and unexplained celestial phenomena, a woman who had dared to challenge the scientific orthodoxy. She was based in a remote observatory in New Mexico, equally alienated from the scientific mainstream, a kindred spirit. She might be radical enough, desperate enough for truth, to listen to his insane story. Contacting Lena was a risk, a leap of faith, but it was a calculated one. He sent her an encrypted email, vaguely referencing anomalous data and celestial alignment theories that aligned with her own suppressed research, hoping to pique her curiosity without revealing too much too soon. To his surprise, she responded almost immediately, her tone guarded but intrigued, a flicker of interest in her words. They arranged a clandestine meeting at a roadside diner in a forgotten town along the I-70, a neutral, overlooked territory. Lena Petrova was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, that seemed to bore into his very soul. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, framing a face etched with the weariness of intellectual battle, and she carried an air of fierce determination, tempered by years of fighting against institutional bias and academic scorn. Ethan explained everything, showing her the fragment, detailing his erased memories, the operatives, the gateway, the Anunnaki, the whole unbelievable narrative. He spoke with an intense, almost feverish conviction, his voice low and urgent, his words tumbling out like a dam breaking. Lena listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally taking meticulous notes in a small, battered notebook, her pen scratching softly on the paper. When he finished, a long, heavy silence hung between them, punctuated only by the clatter of dishes in the diner, the distant drone of the highway. "Dr. Vance," she finally said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, yet firm. "What you're telling me, it's insane. It flies in the face of everything we know about physics, astronomy, history. It shatters every paradigm." She paused, then slowly reached out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, towards the fragment on the table, drawn to its subtle hum. "But your data, the orbital equations you found in Thorne's papers, they are disturbingly precise. And this object—" She picked up the fragment, her eyes widening as she felt its coldness, its faint, rhythmic hum, its undeniable alien origin. "It's not from Earth, not in a million years." She looked up at him, her gaze piercing, unwavering, meeting his. "If what you say is true, Ethan, then we're talking about a planetary-scale deception, a millennia-old cover-up, a fundamental lie at the heart of human civilization, and the return of beings who engineered our existence, who shaped our very DNA. What do they want? What is their ultimate purpose? Are they saviors or conquerors?" Ethan shook his head, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. "I don't know, but I saw connect, initiate, return. I think it's a command sequence tied to an astrological event, to Nibiru's alignment. I think it means they're coming back, and the gateway is their point of entry. We need to get back to that site, Lena. We need to understand what initiate means before it's too late, before they arrive and make our efforts meaningless." Lena clenched her jaw, her knuckles white around the fragment, her grip tight. A storm of conflicting emotions raged in her eyes, skepticism warring with scientific curiosity, fear battling with a profound sense of responsibility, a desire for truth overriding all else. This was her fifth emotional explosion. The object had awakened, not just in Ethan's hand, but in hers, its hum resonating through her. It wasn't just a vision now, it was a shared physical experience. A symbol in her hand that defied all logic, and a voice, not just in Ethan's mind, but a faint, almost imperceptible whisper echoing through her own consciousness as she held the fragment. A soft, ancient command: prepare. This was the Verada 4. Ethan had found an ally, a true partner in his desperate quest, and with her a critical piece of the puzzle. He had gained access to a devastating truth, not just through memory, but through a shared, undeniable experience. They were now both witnesses to the impossible, bound by a terrifying secret. Lena, holding the fragment, her face pale but resolute, stared at Ethan. She finally saw what was hidden, not just an ancient god, but a fragment of living, alien technology, a direct link to a past that defied human comprehension, and a future that promised to shatter everything humanity had ever believed. The revelation was immense, intense, and cinematographic, but still left the ultimate purpose of the Anunnaki's return pending. The full truth of their intentions and what initiate truly meant was still beyond their grasp. The stage was set for their return, and humanity was utterly unprepared for the cosmic drama about to unfold. Undies, with Lena Petrova now on board, her brilliant analytical mind fully engaged, the narrative accelerated, transforming from a solitary quest into a desperate two-person race against time. The Utah desert sun, once a symbol of isolation and endless, indifferent vastness, now felt like a relentless, burning clock, counting down to an unknown hour, a pivotal moment in human history. The hum of the fragment, amplified by Lena's keen perception and her own scientific instruments, became a constant, almost maddening pulse, urging them onward, a silent, insistent drumbeat in their minds. The atmosphere around them grew dense, with a sense of impending inevitability, a premonition that something colossal was about to shift the very axis of their world, altering its course forever. They moved with a clandestine precision born of desperation, and the knowledge that every move they made was likely being watched, scrutinized by the shadowy organization. Lena, with her connections in the darker, more unconventional corners of the scientific community, those who trafficked in suppressed data, overlooked phenomena, and unacknowledged truths, managed to acquire a specialized vehicle. It was an armored, off-road monstrosity, a heavily modified Ford Bronco, outfitted with advanced cloaking technology and sophisticated countermeasures against electronic surveillance, making it virtually undetectable to conventional tracking. They packed it with cutting-edge scientific equipment, emergency supplies, and a desperate hope that they could uncover the full truth before it was too late, before the final act of this cosmic drama unfolded without their intervention. Their destination was the Utah desert, the exact coordinates of Ethan's first encounter, the place where the gateway lay buried. Lena's meticulous analysis of Thorne's hidden equations, combined with the subtle energy readings from the fragment, had pinpointed a specific window of opportunity, a precise celestial alignment when Nibiru's gravitational and energetic influence would be at its peak, and the gateway's activation would be complete. That window was perilously close, less than 72 hours away, a rapidly shrinking sliver of time. As they drove, the landscape changed dramatically, transforming from the bustling urban sprawl of Boulder to the stark, majestic desolation of the Utah wilderness. The familiar scent of sun-baked earth and sagebrush filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of ozone from the fragment, stirring memories in Ethan, not just of the recent encounter, but of childhood explorations, of dreams of ancient mysteries, of a primal connection to the land. He felt a profound sense of coming full circle, of returning to the origin of his deepest questions, of his true calling. Lena, ever the pragmatist, was focused on the technical challenges, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The energy signature from the fragment is increasing exponentially," she stated, her eyes glued to a holographic display that projected complex data streams, glowing with alien algorithms. "It's feeding off the planetary alignment, acting as a receiver, or perhaps a trigger for the gateway itself. We need to understand the command sequence on the gateway console. Connect, initiate, return. It's likely a sequence of specific energy frequencies or vibrational patterns, perhaps a unique, resonant frequency that only this fragment can produce." Ethan held the fragment, its coldness now radiating an almost painful heat, a living ember in his palm. The visions were no longer fleeting or fragmented. They were continuous, overwhelming, a torrent of information flooding his mind. He saw the Anunnaki, not just as static images, but in motion, their vast, silent ships descending through the crimson, stormy skies of Nibiru, their immense forms radiating power. He saw them landing on Earth, not as conquerors, but as architects, shaping early humanity, guiding its evolution, embedding knowledge within its very DNA. influencing its consciousness. And then he saw them leave, a reluctant departure, leaving behind their technology, their gateways, and the fragmented memories that became human myths, stories whispered around ancient campfires. The true purpose of their departure, the reason for the long silence, the impetus for their return. These were the final, crucial pieces of the puzzle, the missing links in the millennia-old narrative. Why did they leave? And why were they returning now after all this time? As they approached the general area of the site, Lena's advanced sensors detected a faint but unmistakable energy shield, an invisible barrier distorting their cloaking capabilities, creating subtle ripples in the atmospheric data. "They've fortified the perimeter," she noted, her voice grim, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "The operatives, they know we're coming. Or they're expecting something. Or both. The energy signature is too strong to be just conventional surveillance." Ethan peered through the night vision scope, its green glow illuminating the desolate landscape. Shadows moved in the distance, small dark figures patrolling the rugged terrain with military precision. It was a well-defended zone, a fortress built in the heart of nowhere. They couldn't simply drive in. They had to be stealthy, subtle, moving like ghosts through the night. They parked the armored vehicle several miles away, camouflaging it expertly amidst a cluster of jagged rock formations, blending it seamlessly with the natural environment. Under the cover of the inky, star-dusted desert night, they began their trek on foot, moving through the treacherous terrain with the aid of night vision goggles and specialized climbing gear. The air was frigid, the silence absolute, save for the crunch of their boots on the desert floor and the insistent, growing hum of the fragment in Ethan's hand, a silent guide. As they drew closer, the ground began to tremble again, more violently this time, a deep, resonant vibration that threatened to shake them off their feet. The metallic scent in the air intensified, mingling with a strange, sweet fragrance, like ozone and ancient incense, a scent that heralded profound change. Through his night vision, Ethan saw the familiar crescent-shaped depression now covered by a temporary, camouflaged structure, clearly erected by the operatives, a crude attempt to conceal the colossal gateway. But even through the obscuring tarpaulins, a faint, rhythmic blue glow pulsed outwards, illuminating the desert floor. They found a breach in the perimeter, a small, unguarded section near a treacherous rockfall, a blind spot Lena had expertly identified. Using Lena's specialized climbing gear, they ascended a sheer cliff face, gaining a precarious vantage point overlooking the hidden gateway. From above, through their scopes, they could see the temporary structure clearly. It was a hive of activity. Operatives moved purposefully, setting up monitoring equipment, reinforcing the defenses, their movements frantic, desperate. And in the center, directly over the gateway, the blue light pulsed with an almost blinding intensity, projecting upwards into the night sky, a silent, cosmic beacon. As Ethan watched, a new element entered the scene. A team of scientists, distinct from the armed operatives, moved around the gateway, their white lab coats stark against the dark uniforms. They were setting up their own complex machinery, pointing it directly at the pulsing blue aperture. It looked like a counter-device, an immense, intricate piece of technology designed to disrupt or close the gateway, to sever the connection before it could be completed. "They're trying to shut it down," Lena whispered, her voice tight with urgency, the implication chilling. "They're trying to sever the connection, to prevent the arrival. Or perhaps they're trying to control it, to hijack it for their own purposes." Ethan felt a sudden, profound revelation, a cold clarity that cut through the fear and adrenaline. It wasn't just about humanity not being ready for the truth, not just about protecting global stability. It was about control. The secretive organization wasn't protecting humanity from a dangerous truth. They were attempting to hijack it, to weaponize the Anunnaki's return, or to prevent it entirely for their own unknown agenda, an agenda that certainly didn't have humanity's best interests at heart. This was the sixth emotional explosion, a blow that struck at the heart of his moral compass, shaking his foundational beliefs. He understood with a chilling clarity that humanity itself was a pawn in a game played by forces far older and more powerful, manipulated from the shadows. He looked at the scientists, at the operatives, then at the pulsating blue gateway, and then at the fragment in his hand, which now throbbed with a fiery heat, projecting a final vivid image into his mind. A vast alien ship, immense and silent, descending rapidly from the stars, its immense shadow falling over the earth, a cosmic leviathan. The Anunnaki were coming, and humanity, both its protectors and its manipulators, was dangerously close to sealing its own fate, utterly unprepared for the architects of their world. If you've made it this far without hitting pause, it's because this has resonated with you. So, strengthen this content, hit like now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The air thickened, becoming charged with an electric, almost painful energy that vibrated against Ethan's eardrums and along his nerves. The hum from the fragment in Ethan's hand reached a fever pitch, a high-frequency whine that resonated through his entire body, making his teeth ache and his eyes blur with the intensity. Lena, beside him, clutched her head, wincing from the intense psychic resonance emanating from the gateway, a palpable force that assaulted their minds. The entire desert seemed to hold its breath, poised on the edge of a cosmic revelation, a momentous event about to unfold. Below them, at the heart of the camouflaged facility, the blue light of the gateway intensified, shimmering violently, its surface roiling like an agitated ocean. The scientists, working frantically, their faces etched with grim determination, completed their setup, activating a massive multi-pronged device aimed squarely at the portal. A high-pitched metallic whine pierced the night, growing louder, more insistent, designed to destabilize the gateway's energy field, to rip apart the fabric of the connection. The ground trembled, not with the natural rhythm of an earthquake, but with the artificial tremor of raw, controlled power, a clash of ancient and modern technologies. "They're trying to close it," Lena yelled over the cacophony, her voice strained, barely audible above the rising din. "They're trying to sever the connection to prevent the arrival. They're fighting against it." Ethan looked from the frantic scientists to the pulsing, wavering gateway, then at the fragment glowing like a miniature sun in his palm. He knew what he had to do. He didn't understand the full implications, the ultimate consequence of his actions, but the command sequence, connect, initiate, return, echoed in his mind with an undeniable force, an absolute imperative that transcended all logic. This was not a choice. It was an imperative, a destiny he had unknowingly pursued his entire life, a final piece in a cosmic puzzle. He didn't know if stopping the operatives would lead to humanity's salvation or its doom. He didn't know if the Anunnaki's return would bring enlightenment or subjugation, peace or a new form of slavery. But he knew, with every fiber of his being, that humanity deserved to know its true history, to face its true architects, to choose its own future, not to have it dictated by a hidden cabal, by manipulative forces operating in the shadows. The secret, the lie, the millennia-old deception had to end, no matter the cost. "I have to get to the console," Ethan stated, his voice calm amidst the chaos, a strange, resolute fire hardening his features, burning away all doubt. "The fragment, it's the key. I can initiate the full connection, complete the sequence." Lena nodded, her face grim, her eyes reflecting the glowing portal. "I'll create a diversion. It won't hold them long. Get to the gateway, don't hesitate. We're out of time." Without another word, Lena pulled a small, sleek device from her tactical pack, a piece of technology clearly designed for covert operations. With a practiced flick, she activated it. A high-frequency sonic pulse erupted from the device, aimed directly at the nearest group of operatives who were attempting to reposition themselves. The sound was non-lethal, but utterly disorienting, sending the men scrambling, clutching their ears, their disciplined formation instantly broken, their weapons falling to the ground. Flares erupted from her pack, showering the perimeter with blinding light and deafening bangs, drawing the attention of every operative in the vicinity, creating a pocket of chaos. "Go!" she shouted as gunfire erupted around her, returning fire with surprising accuracy from a small futuristic pistol he hadn't known she possessed. A desperate last stand. Ethan didn't look back. He scaled down the cliff face, moving with an agility fueled by adrenaline and a primal sense of purpose, his eyes fixed on the pulsing gateway. He darted through the chaos, weaving between disoriented operatives and frantic scientists, their shouts and curses echoing around him, a symphony of human panic. The metallic whine from the counter-device grew unbearable, making his head throb, threatening to rupture his eardrums. He could feel the gateway's blue light flicker, weakening under the assault, almost collapsing. Time was running out, seconds slipping away like grains of sand. He reached the edge of the temporary structure, slipping inside through a gap in the camouflage tarpaulin, the sudden silence of the interior, a jarring contrast to the external battle. The central chamber was an incredible sight, a marvel of alien engineering. The circular gateway pulsed at its heart, the shimmering blue surface wavering, almost collapsing under the stress. Surrounding it was the vast alien console he had seen in his visions, a complex array of glowing symbols and crystalline interfaces, humming with latent power, and directly above it, hovering in midair, was the three-word command, now blazing with an undeniable urgent light. Connect. Initiate, return. The scientists were still frantically working on their counter-device, oblivious to his entry, their faces grim with concentration, utterly focused on their task. He could hear Lena's desperate struggle outside, the escalating gunfire, the shouts, the sounds of a battle that might very well be her last. He had to be quick. He moved to the console, its obsidian-like surface cold and smooth, surprisingly warm where the symbols glowed. The geometric symbols etched into its surface mirrored those on his fragment, a perfect match. He held the fragment aloft, its internal light now blazing, resonating with the console, a silent call and response. A deep, resonant hum emanated from the console, responding to the fragment's presence, recognizing its missing piece. He pressed the fragment against a specific node on the console, a circular indentation that perfectly matched its shape. The fragment clicked into place, sinking seamlessly into the console, becoming one with the ancient technology, completing a circuit that had been dormant for millennia. The moment it connected, the blue light of the gateway exploded, not with destructive force, but with an overwhelming surge of energy, a brilliant, blinding pulse that filled the entire chamber. The counter-device shrieked, then sputtered, its intricate machinery overloading, sparks showering across the chamber, arcs of electricity jumping across its delicate components. The scientists cried out in alarm, stumbling backward, shielding their eyes from the blinding light. The metallic whine died, replaced by a triumphant, resonant chord that filled the entire canyon, vibrating through the earth and sky. The gateway, now fully activated, pulsed with a stable, brilliant blue light, its surface a perfect, unwavering portal, a cosmic mirror. And then, from within the gateway, not shadowy forms, but a single, immense, regal figure stepped through, emerging into the human world. It was an Anunnaki, taller and more imposing than any he had imagined, easily towering over 20 feet, its vast feathered wings folded majestically against its back, shimmering with an ethereal light. Its eyes glowed with an ancient, knowing intelligence, a profound wisdom that seemed to contain the history of the universe itself. Its presence radiated an aura of immense power, but also of profound wisdom and an almost melancholic authority. It looked directly at Ethan, its gaze piercing, seeing not just the man, but the culmination of millennia of a hidden plan, the reluctant catalyst. If this content has opened your mind, comment below, "I saw what he saw." That helps us understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell, because the next episodes will go even deeper. And don't leave without clicking on the next video. It's the continuation of this journey. This was the Virada 5, the true climax, the despoiling that closed one cycle but opened an unimaginable abyss. Ethan stood before the full truth, stripped bare of all illusion. Not just an ancient god, but a living, breathing Anunnaki, stepping through an active portal, marking the complete return. He looked into its eyes and understood. Humanity was not alone. It was not self-made, not the product of random evolution. It was a product, a creation, genetically engineered for a purpose, now perhaps ready to be fulfilled. The Anunnaki had returned not to destroy, but to reclaim what was theirs, to guide humanity to its next, perhaps inevitable stage of evolution. Or perhaps to reassert control over a species that had strayed too far from its original design, a species that had forgotten its true architects. The revelation was not given as an answer, but as an impact, a seismic shift in understanding that changed everything, leaving the viewer and Ethan to interpret the boundless implications. The future of humanity, its past, its very essence, all hung in the balance, suspended in the shimmering blue light of the gateway. The Anunnaki raised a hand, not in threat, but in a gesture of profound, ancient greeting, a silent acknowledgement across species and millennia. Its voice, a resonant chord that vibrated through Ethan's very soul, spoke not in words, but in pure thought, filling his mind, overriding all other sound. The cycle is complete. We have returned. And you have fulfilled your purpose. The seed of memory planted long ago, now awakened. Welcome, Catalyst. Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of both dread and a strange, quiet peace. His purpose, the strange connection, the nightmares, the relentless drive. It had all been leading to this moment, a grand design he could never have fully comprehended. He was not just an archaeologist. He was a catalyst, a living key, unknowingly guided by forces beyond his comprehension to reactivate a millennia-old project. Humanity's destiny was no longer its own. The architects were back, stepping through their forbidden realm. The gateway pulsed, a silent promise and a terrifying threat, as the first Anunnaki stood fully on Earth, looking at its ancient creation, its eyes holding the weight of eons. What would this return mean for Earth, for humanity's freedom, for its very understanding of existence? Was this a new dawn, or a final, silent subjugation? The questions hung in the silent, star-dusted desert, echoing into an uncertain future.